From the splinters of a clerk's stool in Cleveland to the architectural center of the global economy, history remembers the man as a philanthropist in a top hat. The ledgers remember him as the most efficient predator to ever balance a book. While his contemporaries were chasing the adrenaline of the gold mines or the noisy chaos of the stock exchange, John D. Rockefeller was doing something far more clinical. He was mapping the invisible scaffolding of history. He wasn't just selling oil, he was capturing the very flow of the modern world, one calculated rebate at a time. The ledger was his first love, his first covenant, and his primary weapon. Before the refineries, before the pipelines, and before the empire, there was Ledger A. It was a small leather-bound book where a teenage Rockefeller recorded every penny spent and every penny earned. To most men, a ledger is a boring record of the past, a tombstone of transactions. To Rockefeller, it was a manual for the future, a diagnostic tool for extraction. He possessed a relentless, almost visceral disrespect for sloppy business practices and an even deeper disdain for the men who practiced them. He didn't see business as a series of friendly exchanges. He saw it as a form of war, but not a war fought with brass bands and bayonets. This was a war of silence, encrypted codes, and systematic consolidation. He would transmit messages in cipher, covering his entire operation in a shroud of secrecy, wondering why any general would ever send a brass band in advance to notify the enemy of an attack. Rockefeller understood a fundamental truth that escaped his rivals. The system is the prize, not the product. While others fought over individual wells in the mud of Pennsylvania, Rockefeller looked at the infrastructure that connected the producer to the consumer. He saw that the world was moving toward a new era of light, fueled by kerosene. But to control the light, you didn't need to own the sun. You just needed to own the window. In the oil business of the 1860s, that window was transportation. At 25, Rockefeller was already operating on a different frequency than his peers. He had a complicated relationship with his father, Big Bill, a traveling salesman who once boasted that he cheated his sons to keep them sharp. Rockefeller took that sharpness and refined it into a clinical self-confidence that bordered on the supernatural. When Cornelius Vanderbilt, the richest man in America and 45 years his senior, wanted to meet him, Rockefeller didn't humble himself or rush to New York. He demanded Vanderbilt come to Cleveland. He knew he was the most competent person in the room long before the room knew he existed. He had learned the underlying principles of business in childhood, trading turkeys and lending money at interest while other boys were playing. By the time he reached manhood, he needed no advisors. He was the architect of his own necessity. He spoke of his business in religious terms, a fusion of Baptist piety and predatory logic. To Rockefeller, a contract was not a mere legal document. It was a covenant. Fidelity to a covenant was the mark of a real man. This religious zeal provided the moral armor for his most lethal maneuvers. If he was upbuilding an industry from the chaos of competition into the order of a monopoly, then any method used to achieve that end was, in his mind, righteous. He was the greatest borrower, a man who could charm birds out of trees to secure the capital needed to fuel his expansion. He watched the markets not with the eyes of a gambler, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a machinist looking for a point of friction to oil or a competitor to grind down. The invisible scaffolding of the Standard Oil empire was built on a single devastating mechanism, the rebate. In the early days of refining, transportation was the largest expense, an extraction point that drained the lifeblood of small refiners. It often cost more to ship a barrel of oil than to refine it. Rockefeller realized that if he could control the cost of movement, he could dictate the survival of every other refiner in the country. He studied the railroads, the Erie, the Pennsylvania, the New York Central, and saw them for what they were: hungry, over-leveraged machines in desperate need of consistent traffic. He partnered with Henry Flagler, his alter ego, and a man equally obsessed with building something solid and substantial. Together, they offered the railroads a deal they couldn't refuse, guaranteed massive daily volume in exchange for secret rebates. On the surface, the posted rates for shipping oil appeared equal for everyone. In the systemic reality, Standard Oil was receiving a kickback on every barrel they shipped. Eventually, Rockefeller pushed this even further, securing drawbacks, a fee the railroads paid to Standard Oil for every barrel a competitor shipped. Imagine the ledger. Every time a rival refiner shipped a product to market, they were unwittingly paying Rockefeller to destroy them. It was a closed-loop system of predatory extraction. This was the secret weapon that allowed Standard to survive downturns that obliterated everyone else. When prices dropped, Rockefeller didn't panic. He bought. He used his war chest of cash, accumulated through these hidden profits, to swallow the industry while it was weak. He was a familiar face at every Cleveland bank, but his visits were never pleas for mercy. They were transactions of power. If a bank president refused him a loan, he didn't argue. He simply moved to the next office and the next, with a low-keyed but relentless persistence. He once drew up a list of every firm in the city directory and visited them one by one, day after day, week after week, until he wore down the very walls of the financial establishment. In 1872, Rockefeller initiated what historians call the Cleveland Massacre. In just 4 weeks, he bought out 23 of his 26 competitors in the city. His approach was a masterclass in psychological warfare. He would invite a rival refiner to his office, sit them down sweetly, and open his books. He would show them the high profits Standard was making, even in hard times, and then show them their own impending insolvency. His pitch was simple. Come with us, and we will do you good. Stay independent, and you will be crushed by the machinery we have built. He would tell them to let the other fellow talk, while he sat in a state of absolute self-control, never raising his voice, never uttering a profane word. Behind that placid exterior lay a hide like a rhinoceros. He knew their debts, their operating costs, and their weaknesses better than they did because he had studied the business from every angle, from the wells to the freight agents to the boat captains. Those who joined were given stock in Standard Oil and authority to run their divisions. Rockefeller was building a company of founders, a confederation of the competent. Those who refused were subjected to a good sweating. He would cut prices to below cost, depriving the holdouts of revenue until they were sick enough to sell. He bought land in the way of their pipelines and bought off the bankers who provided their loans. Take the case of Oliver Payne. Rockefeller didn't just want Payne's refinery. He wanted Payne's political bloodline. He offered $400,000 for a company worth barely $250,000. It wasn't an overpayment. It was a strategic consolidation. By bringing the politically connected Payne family into his cap table, Rockefeller ensured that the laws of the land would bend toward the ledger. He used his equity as a weapon, making it in the best interest of the powerful to protect the Standard Oil machine. He also perfected the hidden company. Rockefeller would buy highly profitable niche refineries and command them to operate as if nothing had changed. They kept their names. They kept their branding. To the public, they were independent competitors. In the systemic reality, they were subsidiaries of the trust, used to gather intelligence on rivals. Often, a refiner enraged by Standard Oil's tactics would refuse to sell to Rockefeller, only to sell to a local competitor, unaware that they had just handed their assets directly into Rockefeller's pocket. The greatest threat to Rockefeller's machinery was innovation he didn't control. When independent oilmen began building pipelines to bypass the railroads, and thus bypass Rockefeller's rebate system, he fought them with the ferocity of a cornered general. He used legal injunctions, media smears, and predatory land acquisitions. He planted stories that pipelines were prone to leaks that would destroy farmland. He bought the customers of the pipeline companies to starve them of demand. He used every weapon but violence to maintain the consolidation of the flow. But then, the facts changed. Rockefeller realized that the pipeline was a technological phenomenon that could not be stopped. In a move of brilliant, cold pragmatism, he reversed his entire strategy. He stopped fighting the pipelines and began building them. He turned the railroad rebates on their head, paying subsidies to the railroads to compensate them for the traffic lost to his own pipelines. He understood that you cannot fight the future. You can only own the infrastructure of the future. He would leverage technology to create a product that could not exist before the railroad and the telegraph, using instant price data to find the best times to buy and sell crude. Standard Oil eventually began selling over 50 byproducts from the refining process, from petroleum jelly to high-grade lubricants. Rockefeller didn't invent a single one of these innovations. He simply waited for others to experiment and prove a profitable market. Once the risk was mitigated, he would swoop in and buy out every producer, paying high prices to secure the patents, and then using his massive distribution network to dominate the niche. He hated middlemen with a passion that bordered on the obsessive. By the 1870s, he was going direct to the consumer, building his own storage tanks and delivery wagons to eliminate the 5-cent markup added by retailers. He made a fine crop of enemies, but he made oil lower in price than it had ever been. Rockefeller's obsession with numbers was the heartbeat of the company. He would inspect every line of every bill, admonishing anyone who failed to do so. He once noticed that a refinery was using 40 drops of solder to seal a kerosene can. He asked the foreman to try 39 drops. When 39 drops worked without leaking, he saved the company thousands of dollars a year. This was the spirit of calculation, the relentless iteration that shipping over 300 new features in a single year might look like today. He was not one to persist in a flawed situation. He was a man who solved a problem, put it in good hands, and moved to the next. By the 1880s, the Standard Oil Trust was a leviathan. It was a loose confederation turned into a singular, world-spanning organism. Rockefeller's net worth began to decouple from his own labor. During retirement, his wealth grew more than it had during his active years, simply because he held onto his stock and let it feed upon itself. Between 1905 and 1915, his net worth increased by $100 million, while he was essentially doing nothing. He had built a fortress of cash that allowed him to move into battle backed by abundant reserves, winning bidding contests simply because his war chest was deeper than any government's treasury. He would buy off politicians and reporters, ensuring they stayed bought. When the media wrote critical articles, he didn't always fight back with words. He fought back with ownership. He believed in extreme focus, demanding that his partners attend closely to the business and nothing else. If a dispute arose, he would take the risk himself, once putting up $3 million of his own money to buy oil leases when his partners were too afraid to move. His boldness was backed by a character and ability that could see farther than anyone else in the industry. Standard Oil was eventually dismantled by the Supreme Court in 1911, but the invisible scaffolding remained. The breakup actually made Rockefeller even richer as the individual pieces of the empire, companies like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, were worth more than the whole. He had built a machine that could not be truly destroyed, only subdivided. He had successfully replaced the old chaotic struggle with a new idea of cooperation. Rockefeller went to his grave believing he had performed a service for humanity. He saw himself as the man who brought order to a chaotic and wasteful industry. He believed in the principles of centralization, savings, and service. To him, the competitors he crushed were merely unreasonable men, trying to tear down a house large enough to shelter everyone. He didn't see the blood on the ledger. He only saw the balance. He had mastered the art of concentration. He had turned the ledger into a weapon. He had built a machine that outlived him, a system of extraction and consolidation that serves as the blueprint for every modern corporate empire. History remembers the philanthropy, but the ledgers remember the cost. A world reshaped in the image of a man who never lost his temper, never raised his voice, and never stopped counting until the very end.